Good morning, church. I hope your Thanksgiving went well. We had all kinds of food. And of course, we really had to have some self-control. I hope you exhibited some self-control, but it was hard, wasn't it? I mean, we had pecan pie, we had pumpkin pie. I mean, oh man, it was great. And of course, the most important thing is that we spent time with our family, being thankful for a God who loves us, who cares for us, who sent His Son Jesus to die for us. And it moves us to think about this story, for example, the one we just read, about how our love for Christ, does it not call us to be different? And this is what we have. We have a different kind of person, don't we, in this story? And that is something our world desperately needs. Different kinds of people, different kinds of men, different kinds of women. And they're searching for these different kinds of people, which is why we have funny situations where people like Kim Kardashian are made GQ's Man of the Year. I mean, if you kept up with the news, you would know that she was a woman made Man of the Year. Why? Because she created a new brand of underwear for men. And she made a lot of money doing it. In other words, she's a man because she made a lot of money. I think that is one example of many why we have to pause and think every time we hear certain words in our society, like man, woman, mother, father. You know, I cannot help but quote the actor Mandy Patinkin from The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. There's a lot of people using words, and I don't think they mean what they think they mean. Jesus called us to be different kinds of men and different kinds of women, and it has nothing to do with how much money you make. Over the last several weeks, even months, we've been talking about the Sermon on the Plateau by Jesus in Luke chapter 6. When people listen to that story, when they make that narrative, that lesson part of their life, and they make it their way to live, they begin to be different. They understand the kingdom is different because Jesus wanted us to have an understanding that was upside down. They begin to understand how we should love people even if they are tough to love. They begin to understand how we should not give up truth to be gracious, and yet we should never sacrifice grace in our journey for truth. All these are evident in Luke chapter 6. Know this: if you follow Jesus, you will be different because you begin to honor the image God made you in. You begin to honor other people created in the image of God. And when you start to do this, you begin to honor the Creator who made you. C.S. Lewis says there are two kinds of people: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says, "Have it your way." In today's lesson, here in Luke chapter 7, you want to turn there with me. In Luke chapter 7, we see a different kind of man. One who cared for those who were beneath him, one who loved his country, one whose faith made Jesus marvel. Was he perfect? Not saying that. But he was different. His standards for living were different. Shouldn't ours be? He was a different kind of man. If you're following along there, either in the reading in your bulletin or in your own Bible, you see that it makes the connection in verse 1 back to Luke chapter 6, that these things happened after his sermon, and then we have an introduction to our character. There's a centurion. Luke breaks ground here, church. Let me tell you why. Luke writes the Gospel of Luke, and then he writes the book of Acts, both to Theophilus. One is part A, the second one is part B. Both are written to the same person. Here, Luke takes a shovel, he digs a hole, he plants a seed that is then growing in the book of Acts, and that is the Gentiles. The Gentiles come to Christ. We see the Centurion. I don't know if you watch The Chosen. I highly recommend it. It is a great show. Raise your hand if you watch The Chosen or have seen an episode or whatever. Okay, good, excellent. Now, The Chosen is something, it does something that preachers have been trying to do probably for the last 1900 years. That is to make the Gospels and the disciples and Jesus real to the hearer or the listener. In The Chosen, we have one of my favorite characters, a centurion by the name of Gaius, a good man who seems to love all people and is in conflict with his Roman station. It is here in the book of Luke where I believe we see the inspiration for Dallas Jenkins' character, Gaius. And I think you're going to see this story come about next season. He's a centurion. Centurions were not by themselves. They were part of a legion. A legion was 6,000 Roman soldiers. And within that legion, there were 60 centurions, of which he was one. And those centurions had 100 men underneath them. Now, they were not necessarily Roman. They could be. But this being in Capernaum, it was very unlikely. In fact, it was more likely he was from some other country that Rome had absorbed, and he was just brought in. And he started from the ground and worked his way up until finally he became a centurion. He made his way. Whether it was on the battlefield or in a rebellion, he showed courage. He had something to be prideful about. That was common. These men were considered to be the backbone of the legion, the backbone of Rome's army, so they were paid like it. They were paid considerably larger wages. They were tasked with keeping discipline, whether it was in the ranks of the soldiers or when the governor or the praetor said, "Go snuff out that rebellion." They were the disciplinarians. And they often resorted to brutality to do it. I would guess that every centurion probably had a slave. And yet Matthew also tells the same story. We find out in Matthew that the slave is a man. This centurion was different. This is important because Jesus was different. We see here in the reading that this centurion highly valued his slave. What does that mean? Highly valued a slave? I mean, it could be utilitarian, right? It could mean that he's got something to give. That if he is sick, that centurion would miss it. Maybe he's a good cook. Maybe he's a good babysitter. Maybe, as was rampant in Rome, his slave was good in the bedroom. That was common. This was not something dealing with utility. The Greek word tells us as much. The Greek word, therefore, valued, is the word entimos, which means, check this out, write this in your Bible in the margins, that this slave was prized, that this slave was precious, that this slave was held in honor with this Roman centurion. How rare is that? A master loving his slave. This centurion was different. My question for you today is, what do you do that's different? I mean, I see teachers, I see firemen, I see singers, I see parents, I see grandparents and realtors, I see uncles and aunts. Whoever you are, there is some. Honor them, or do you step on them? Do you honor them, or do you step on them? When I was in Malawi, I found out that white preachers are held in high esteem there. And partially the reason is because of Britain's occupation of that country, like in the 1800s. And you see the evidence of that occupation that used to occur still, like firewood, which is a resource that is diminishing rapidly. And it's interesting because you'll find firewood in two places, or trees in two places. One is cemeteries, because you don't want to wake the dead chopping down trees because they'll come and curse you, so they don't do that. The other one is large plots of land where British people used to live. They don't cut those trees down either, for some reason. While I was in Malawi, I experienced that esteem. They almost wouldn't let me touch my luggage. They would grab it from me and carry it for me. And my luggage had wheels, by the way. So I'm like, no, I can wheel it. They're like, no, and they pick it up and they just carry it. And I experienced that from the moment I got off the airplane in Malawi. Every single time I was holding my luggage, there was someone getting my luggage and taking it for me. There was one day where Robert, Lee, and we took this truck. This is a vehicle they bought for disaster relief. And they have a gas shortage, so there was only 2 vehicles on the campus that had gas. This is a diesel. It was one of them. We took this one. And we were leaving the guest house, so we had our luggage, and there I am. I've got my luggage, and they just zoop. They just grab the luggage and they start putting it up there, and then they go to have a conversation in Chichewa, and someone mentions how we're needing to take the benches up there and put benches so people can ride along in there. So I hop up in there, and I'm starting to rearrange the luggage so people have enough places to sit. And I'm picking up benches and putting them in, and all of a sudden I hear this, "Oh my goodness, the preacher!" It was almost as if I broke some cultural norm. And they're like, "No, you need to go sit up in front." I was like, "No, let Robert. He's older than I am." "Okay, you sit between them." I looked inside, and it was a stick shift, and it's a bumpy road, and I don't want to be sitting there. So I said, "No, I'll graciously decline that." So I sat in the back. I'm pretty sure that while I was driving or riding along in this truck in the back with the Malawian wind in my hair, I was the only white preacher in that country in the back of a truck. When we were driving through Ntonda, you should have seen all the kids and adults. What is going on? And I looked over at the men with me, and their heads are down. I got the idea that I was supposed to be esteemed and put in the front of the truck, and they felt, I think I may have broke something, because they felt a little sad that I was back there with them. It's interesting, though. Why was I doing that? Why was I lifting my own luggage and moving benches and letting Robert sit up at the front? It's because I honored those people. I love those people. I want to help those people. And I want you to think about this for a second. Especially, let's say, kiddos. When your mama says, "Pick up your clothes," and you don't, and instead you know your mama or your dad's going to pick them up for you if you don't, are you honoring them? See, when we honor people, we love them, we try to help them, and we see this centurion helping this person beneath them. And for us, our best example is Jesus. Think about it for a moment. He gave his life to glorify the creation, which certainly was not nearly as good as he was. So should we. He loved people. We see this in verses 3 through 4. Check this out. He sent some of these Jewish men, these elders in the community, to go speak with Jesus, whose sole purpose was to bring him with them back to heal his servant. And it says that they pleaded earnestly. You see that? They pleaded earnestly. Jesus knows their hearts. He knows that they are speaking truthfully. We find out something interesting about the centurion. Look what they say. He deserves it. They tell Jesus he deserves to have the healing for his servant. And they say the reason for this is because he loves our country. This centurion loves Israel. He loves our people, he loves our culture, he loves our faith, and he's not just all words, he's action, because he helped build our synagogue. Wow, this is a different kind of man, because he loves them. Love is the single biggest reason that the gospel spreads. Did you know that? Whether we're talking about Christ on the cross, the empty tomb, the day of Pentecost, or any act of Christian sacrificial love. I've told you in the past about one of Namakongo's greatest things is the fact that they have a maternity clinic that helps women have 90 babies a month safely. When we were there was 2 women. One was Christian and one was Muslim. It did not matter. They wanted to care for anybody who needed help. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. We send money to Namakongo to help them care for their people there. That's a good thing, right? Should that be done at the expense ever of you using your own hands and your own feet here with people in your neighborhood, across the street, next door, on the pew next to you, ever? No. You are supposed to love everybody and care for others, and that's one of the ways we change the world. The centurion was different, and we are called to love all people, even our enemies. You know, what's interesting is we stand up and we give the Pledge of Allegiance at church. At church. That'd be interesting. But we do that at school, right? A lot of times. Some schools don't do it as much, and that's a good thing. I used to do it all the time. But our greater pledge is to the Lamb who calls us to serve and honor and love people. We are in the kingdom of God, and when we're behaving like we're in the kingdom of God, what happens is we start to do a wonderful service to our country. We start to marry a heavenly kingdom with a fallen kingdom, and that can only ever help the fallen kingdom. Lift it up. Does that make sense? So we need to treat people with love. Jesus goes with them, and we find something else about this man. Notice, they want to bring him to the sick man, the sick boy, right? They think that's the way he heals. That's the way we read all the healings. But once again, Luke breaks ground. It's done differently because he doesn't make it there. The centurion sends his friends out, and he says 3 vocal cues that he is a humble man. Look at this. We see the word Lord used. Lord, you see that? In Greek, that's kurios. That is to call one master. Can you imagine this for a moment? Here's a Roman whose Caesar is master of him, and he is a master of the slave, and he is calling this Jewish teacher his master. He is humble also. He says, don't trouble yourself. You see, he believed whatever Jesus' purposes were greater than his own. And also, he says, I do not deserve you to come under my roof. He looks at the master, and he doesn't want to taint him. Him being a Gentile, he does not want the Jew to come in and be tainted. And so he says, that's why I didn't even come to you. And so we see that he both lifts up Jesus and he lowers himself. I want to tell you a story about a king. His name is King Canute. He is a Danish king of England 1,000 years ago. Historians say he was a wise ruler. He worked diligently to make lives of his subjects better. That sounds great. As is often the case, he was surrounded by sycophants. That is, people who wanted to get ahead by just, telling him everything he wanted to hear. And he got tired of it. So you know what he did? He ordered that his throne be carried out to the seashore. And he gathered all his court around him. And by the sea, the king looked at the tide, and he said, stop to the tide. Well, soon the waters were lapping around his legs. The tide obviously did not heed him. And according to one historian's account, King Canute rose up from his throne, and he said to all, let all men know how empty and worthless is the power of kings. For there is none worthy of the name but he whom heaven, earth, and sea obey by eternal laws. Wow. King Canute lowered himself before the king. Shouldn't we do the same? Humility is in short supply, I think. But that is what we are called to be humble. Timothy Keller says this about humility. The Christian gospel is that I am so flawed that Jesus had to die for me, yet I am so loved and valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. This leads to deep humility and deep confidence at the same time. It undermines both swaggering and sniveling. I cannot feel superior to anyone, and yet I have nothing to prove to anyone. I do not think more of myself nor less of myself. Instead, I think of myself less. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist, makes a link between depression and service. He says that whenever we start to think about ourselves, that's when we start becoming depressed. The cure is to care and love and honor other people above yourselves as Jesus Christ did for you, church. We were made to think of other people first. Did you know that? You're not made to get ahead and become the best and most richest person. You are made to think and help and think of other people first. When we break God's model, we begin to break our own mind, our own soul, our own creative purpose. We are called to be humble. And Christ is the best example of that. And then we see something even greater with the centurion. You see, as the Jews bring this man to his house, Jesus to his house, he didn't want to trouble them, and so he sends these friends, and he says, you don't have to come. All you have to do is say the word. That's it. You don't have to come and lay your hands. You don't have to come sing a song. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is say the word. And he says, because I know this, because Caesar, he tells his subjects what to do, and we do it. I tell my 100 men what to do, and they do it. That's why they pay me the money. And I'm telling you that you have authority. You are the master. You say the word, my servant will be healed. It's magnificent. Christ is marveling at this, saying, there is no one in all of Israel who has this kind of faith. It's interesting. I'm sure he called Caesar Lord, but he certainly called Jesus Lord here. And only one of those lords has the sovereignty over space, time, and matter. And that's Jesus, who heals the slave. Jesus was marveling at his faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says this about faith. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So here is this centurion, confident about the hope that this servant would be healed. And even though he had heard these miracles, maybe he had never seen one, he knew that Jesus could do it. And he knew he could do it from a distance. That's faith, people. I'll say what I said earlier. Now look at me. Whatever you're doing, stop what you're doing and look at me. If we truly believe in Jesus Christ, we will be different. I want to tell you two stories. One is an airplane captain, one is a boat captain. On January 15th, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 departed from New York City's LaGuardia Airport. You might know this story. And within a few minutes, the plane collided with a flock of birds. You recall this? And so all of a sudden, they're having to make an emergency landing. They can't get to any airport or airstrip, so the pilot, Captain Sully, decides to make an emergency landing in the Hudson River. Now, after he makes that emergency landing, he gets everybody off, and he goes through that airplane 2 times as it's beginning to sink to make sure everybody gets off. He is considered a national hero, and I think he ought to be. 3 years later, almost to the date, January 13th, 2012, a massive Italian cruise ship called the Concordia crashed into the rocks and started to sink. Now, as they did an investigation of this, they found out that the ship's captain, Francesco Schettino, was trying to impress a younger female dancer on board when he veered too close to the rocks, and the ship sunk with 4,000 people on board. In that confusion and that chaos, somehow, before everyone got off, he managed to get on a lifeboat early, like way early. And the Coast Guard even said, "You get back on that boat." And they used some explicitives that I will not use. Schettino later said that he fell into the lifeboat. And he could not get back up. But the courts, after doing research and investigations, of course, did not believe him. They charged him with manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning the ship with passengers on board. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, in both those cases, you have one who gave of himself to save others, and one who selfishly lowered others for his own good. You see that? We're supposed to be the kind of people whose faith actually makes a difference. Does your faith make a difference? We're supposed to be the kind of people who love and humble ourselves. We love other people. We humble ourselves before Jesus. We glorify, we honor other people above ourselves, and that will make us different in a good way. That will change the way people, check this out, it begins to change the way people view human beings who do stupid things. There are so many people out there preaching messages of doom and gloom. So many people out there so sad by what's going on in our culture, and I'm not saying that it's all good. Whew. But let me tell you, if you want to change things, it starts with whether you change because of Christ. There's no greater way to change a culture than to do it the way it changed 2,000 years ago, which is following Jesus the Christ church. What is it that Christ said in Luke 6? Whatever measure you use will be measured on you. I think you can take this and put it at the end as like an epilogue to the sermon on the plateau. Because the Centurion lifted up others, and in turn they lifted him up before Christ. You notice that? The Centurion loved others, and in turn they loved him before Jesus. The Centurion lifted up Jesus, and in turn Jesus lifted up him and his servant. Living for Christ will change this world and cause others to follow Christ too. Let's be different like the Centurion.